So I want to talk with you about AIPAC.
Oof.
I know. I'm sorry. I should have picked something more
It's
pleasant.
just ripe for comedy. You know, the Israel-Palestine conflict is just really, if there's one thing they say, it's almost hack. It's so funny,
Well,
Just
that is, I
like,
do wonder that, like, because on your bio, you literally have like comic and Al Jazeera Plus, and I was like, that's a nice fusion.
Oh yeah, we had the first comedy show for Al Jazeera, so that is a huge credit. When I get introduced to shows, they're like, this woman did the impossible. But yeah, that was our show, News Broke, on AJ Plus, and it was fun. We got away with a lot. There were hardly any problems. We spoke openly and freely.
Yep.
I think there was one time, I'm going to be totally frank, we portrayed Jesus. So we had this sketch that was like that if Jesus came back, right, as we're all waiting on him to do,
Right.
and ran on a third-party ticket, Americans would be like, sorry, we gotta vote for Hillary. I mean, come on, we don't want spoilers. Like, screw third parties. I realize he is, the son of God, but think of the Electoral College.
It was a vanity campaign. You got in trouble for that?
Well, we got in trouble because Al Jazeera is not, they're separate from the Qatari government, but that, like, you can't portray prophets, and Jesus.
Right.
Is a prophet. So even it was a sketch, we were pushing the limits. But other than that, AJ Plus was an awesome place to have News Broke, and maybe one day we'll bring it back.
I was thinking of a follow. You're like a follow-up sketch. Like, what if Muhammad was a bong salesman? What if he ran a head shop? I remember in my experience in the Middle East, both like in Turkey and Israel and the Emirates, and like there is a lot of people in general there are very funny. And I remember, I won't tell the whole story, but I was detained going into Israel from Jordan, which is super normal. They don't treat people going in that border well. And
if you don't get detained, you're like, come on, what have I done wrong? I've spoken a lot of truth to power. Like, if you just get through that border, you have to rethink your politics.
Right.
Anyway, go on.
Yeah, like I posted Israel's an apartheid state at least once. Come on, guys. So we were detained for the whole day. This is back in like 2009 or 8. And it was legit. I mean, it was, on one hand, it's like you do have the privilege, frankly, of just knowing that you're American and that, like, they can ruin your day, which they did, and it's very stressful, and you don't have any food, and you do. And I did. I went through multiple rounds of questioning, and they split us up. I remember one time they had one guy to my side, like in my periphery, and then one person standing in front of me, and the guy in my periphery was the one asking me the questions because, like, it was, it's like unpleasant. But his accent was so thick. He had such a thick, like, Israeli, like, why are you coming to Jordan? Da, 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 da. And I remember I was just like, dude, I don't understand what you're saying. So I get that this is, like, supposed to be intimidating, but I can't. If you want me to answer, I need someone who speaks better to me. But
I'm sure he loved that.
Yeah, they did. It was very charming. But at this point, I was pretty angry. But what really hit me about it, and I'm very critical of Israel, to say the least. But we finally get, like, this guy comes to us, and it's like, all right, like, the whole process is done, and we're just going to sit here for a half hour, and then we'll let you know whether or not you come through or you get turned back to Jordan. But just, have some food and relax and whatever. So then he comes back to us a half an hour later, and he goes, I have a good news and a bad news. And at this point, like, what is, like, one of us can go through, one of us can't. Like, it's scary. That was actually the first time I got anxious because the border had already closed at this point. And he goes,
you don't want any rep with the IDF, like, telling you good news and bad news. You're like, oh God, bad news is death. I just know it's somehow there's death.
That's where I was
after
a whole day of being somewhere between, like, enraged and cool. That was finally where I was like, wait, what? Are we going to, like, get driven off somewhere? He goes, bad news, we ruin your day. Good news, welcome to Israel. Like,
Wow.
what the fuck? It's like, where else
It's
would you
like
get a joke like that?
they're so militarized, they have to make jokes about it. Wow. Amazing.
I was like, all right, there is a part of this. I finally got like what other Jews say about this place. I was like, yeah, I do relate to that. I probably would make the same joke. So I want to start. I want to play first. We're going to play this clip from Nancy Pelosi, and I'm just going to go to you and get your reaction to it because I do. This is actually pretty stunning because she's been, I mean, it's obvious where she is in terms of her politics and generationally on some of these kind of like obvious divides that are emerging with people like Ilhan Omar. But she's been trying to kind of thread a needle, at least presentationally. And this is like an incredible sort of, planting her foot really firmly in a very extreme side of the equation. So we're going to play that and then I'll throw to you.
Policy that reaffirms Israel's right to self-defense. In our democratic societies, we should welcome legitimate debate on how best to honor our values and to advance our priorities without questioning loyalty or patriotism. This month, the full House came together to condemn the anti-Semitic myth of dual loyalty and all forms of bigotry with a resolution that, quote, rejects the perpetuation of anti-Semitic stereotypes in the United States and around the world, including the pernicious myth of dual loyalty and foreign allegiance, especially in the context of support for the United States-Israel alliance.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, wow. I mean, that last bit, I'm not sure if she's being accurate. I mean, she is painting the resolution in the House that condemned dual loyalty and whatever anti-Semitic trope that wasn't actually an anti-Semitic trope, because this is all in reference to Representative Ilhan Omar. That resolution was incredibly fraught. And in fact, it was expanded upon to include Islamophobia and anti-Black racism and bigotry in a lot of different forms, in part because of the real and justified criticism that Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats received from piling on Ilhan Omar. Right. And in ways that were incredibly Islamophobic, and if not openly Islamophobic, absolutely played into the right's portrayal of Ilhan Omar. So that entire portrayal of the resolution is wrong, I would say. And like the storyline out of that whole resolution isn't that it included dual loyalty or Israel-U.S. relations. The story out of that is that, oh, you were pressured into including all of these other groups because you were caught out in this horribly hypocritical moment where your ties to Israel and a very far right-wing government were greater than your solidarity with another American representative who was being attacked. Right. And so, that immediately was wrongheaded.
Right. And in a context where there is like broader incitement against her, let's also play that we have the Meghan McCain thing as well. Because, I mean, partially just because, like, I would like to take the opportunity with you to make fun of Meghan McCain with me. That's always fun. Maybe we should also, do we also have the montage of the father thing? All right. But this, before we get to yeah, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, I mean, AIPAC conferences are so interesting, right? For those folks who like never heard of AIPAC until recently and were just sort of getting up on the Israeli lobby, and remember that AIPAC is just one of many different Israeli lobbying groups. It's one of the biggest. We're like $14.9 million into the 2018 midterm election, midterms. But like, if I remember watching AIPAC speeches from conferences before, and if you ever thought that like your representative or your senator were like, you know, a dove or believed in human rights, or, you know, surely they understand what an occupation is or colonialism is, watch watch them at an AIPAC conference, because it is a place where everyone's bloodlust just comes to fruition. It's like, oh, this is the place where Democrats kind of get their like hawkish rocks off, or at these conferences. And so, and on top of that, it's like they are pretty much forbidden from mentioning the occupation. Like, they don't talk about the occupation. AIPAC doesn't openly speak about the occupation. And it's sort of where, like, you know, it's kind of like the gym in Congress where like Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi both like take turns on the rower, you know, which happens to be like Palestinian human rights. That's a very
image, Francesca. Jesus. Whew.
You know, but it's like this is where there's consensus. This is where hawks speak. All doves become hawks. All hawks are always hawks. And I'm not saying that Pelosi is a dove at all, but you had Schumer obviously also taking the opportunity to underhandedly talk about Ilhan Omar at this latest AIPAC conference. He equated calling Nazis good people or decent people with Ilhan Omar's suggestion that, you know, the Israeli lobby was, you know, sort of pulling the strings and purse strings for a lot of representatives, which is real. Like, AIPAC is good money. That's good money. You know, I think we've seen different reps speak out in political campaigns say, like, hey, I went from being a nobody to being a somebody because of AIPAC money, because I took that money. So anyway, all to say is all of this, it's sad. I mean, I think that you're seeing the ways that the lessons of the last month with all the backlash and the discussion of Ilhan Omar and what is anti-Semitism, what is not, what is actually just kind of anti-Black and anti-immigrant and anti-Islam bigotry against her. We're rolling that back, and you see that in this AIPAC conference.
No, I 100%, and I think even like we didn't actually pull it because, I mean, maybe we should have. I mean, Bill de Blasio, you know, he's the mayor of New York City, which is still a very important position. He apparently, someone, most likely himself, has created this sort of delusional concept of him running for president in his head. And, you know, I always give credit where credit is due. So even though I have many, many, many problems with Bill de Blasio, there's no doubt that in like 2013, he was actually speaking about things like inequality before, you know, movements and Sanders put them on the map. Now, he would be running in the left lane in a Democratic primary in this fantasy world where he runs for president. And his speech was, I mean, it was eliminationist almost in terms of Palestinian rhetoric. And I think you're exactly right. Like there is, and even with that resolution, right? Like it turned into a sort of be all, catch all, let's condemn a reform of hate. There was one specific group that wasn't included in that, Palestinians, right? Like it covered literally everybody except the Palestinian people. And this is also on top of the fact that everybody, in addition to distorting her original words, Ilhan Omar came out in a Washington Post op-ed and was like, basically expressed support for a two-state solution. Like, she essentially has what we have never acted on in terms of our foreign policy, but just like consensus U.S. foreign policy. And they're still lying about her every step of the way. Yeah,
exactly. And all of this is thanks to the fact that, you know, the 2018 midterms, despite AIPAC's money, saw the election of the first two female Muslim representatives, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, and it's amazing. And the fact that we're even having these conversations is so huge and potentially could change U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, starting within Congress, which I think it needs to. And I think the other thing that you might have it, but the other thing that I think Democrats are being faced with is this idea of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, right? Pelosi at the same AIPAC conference, I think I have the quote here, called it a dangerous ideology masquerading as policy,
right?
And she called it bigoted. She called BDS bigoted. And it's like, that is, talk about not remembering, you know, apartheid South Africa and the boycott movements against that. It's just such it's so hypocritical, and actually speaks to something that I've talked about. And I think in terms of the ways that people have spoken about Ilhan Omar is that when Black Americans specifically work for justice for Palestinians and speak out about it, they are come down upon 10 times harder. Like you see Mark Lamont Hill, the CNN contributor who was fired after his comments. And that's really interesting. And it's like, oh, because here you have, Black Americans going through their own civil rights struggles, still struggling for equality. And if they're making these links to this oppressed people in Israel, like suddenly the whole moralistic framework for, the Israeli project falls on its ass, Excuse me, sorry, I don't know if I can say that.
Yeah, you definitely can say that. I also think like the other funny part of the relationship between Israel, South Africa, and Black activism is when you have like family email threads where it's like a column from some kid who was sent on a junket to Israel saying South Africa and Israel are totally not comparable, and then you can respond with a column by Desmond Tutu called like South Africa and Israel are comparable. But
wow.
But I mean, like, that is like what's incredible is like Ronnie Kasrils, who is Jewish and was an icon of the liberation movement in South Africa. He's like, it's the same thing. Nelson Mandela said, "We're not free until Palestinians are free." Like, it's clear. I mean, it's so clear, and I think that, yeah, in some ways that is I mean, I think though that's like the liberal remnant of a certain defense of Israel, because I think what you're actually seeing now under Netanyahu is a much more overt, like Olmert and Barak were the type of politicians who would say correctly, like, you know what, we can't do this indefinitely because at a certain point, younger Jewish people are going to be uncomfortable with this because they're not really into this. Netanyahu is like, we can team up with neo-fascist parties in Europe. We're cool with Trump. We're cool with Republicans.
In America, yeah.
Yeah, like neo-fascists in America, precisely. Like, cool. They want their own
Mind you, and
state.
I think someone made this point, and I think it's really important. It's like, what didn't AIPAC? If AIPAC truly is concerned about anti-Semitism, did they not open their entire conference with a surviving family member of the Squirrel Hill synagogue shooting?
Right.
Like, that just happened, and it's really important that we remember that, and especially, not as an American Jew, but I think for American Jews to understand, like, there is a different way, and there is a way that we can, like, tackle anti-Semitism in earnest and not let the Democratic leadership take up all the air on that issue.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.